What is up, book nerds? I am Rachel Bateman. I've got my 3D glasses and my popcorn. I am ready to talk to you all about how a book becomes a movie. Okay, just kidding. I can't keep wearing these. And my toddler came in when I was setting up and ate all my popcorn, so all I have are a few crumbs. But we're still going to talk about book to movie adaptations and what happens behind the scenes to make that work. Like pretty much everything in this industry, there are a lot of moving parts and variables at play here, so each book to film adaptation will look a little bit different, but there is a general path that's taken, and I've broken that down for you in 5 simple parts. Step 1, the pitch. Step 2, the option. Step 3, pre-production. Step 4, production. And step 5, post-production. That seems really simple, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes in each of these steps. I'm going to go over that right now. Step 1, the pitch. Sometimes a producer happens upon your book, reads it, loves it, and they approach you to option your book, or a screenwriter, or whoever. But more often than not, if your book is going to become a movie, you have to pitch that book to people in Hollywood who are in the business of making movies. If you're a traditionally published author, your literary agent will have contacts and co-agents that they work with. This makes getting into the door a lot easier. If you do not have an agent, if you're self-published, or if you're traditionally published without an agent, you can pitch agencies in Hollywood on your own and go directly to those co-agents literary agents are working with. But it is a harder path. They like to work with people they know, they trust their opinions. In Hollywood, more than in publishing, who you know is important. So having an agent to get you in the door there is hugely beneficial, though it is not a deal breaker if you don't have one. Once you have pitched your book and found someone who loves it enough that they want to make it, you get to step 2, the option. We hear this thrown around a lot. So-and-so had their book optioned for film. I'm trying to get my book optioned for film. My book has been optioned for film. And a lot of people are very confused about what this option actually means. So we're going to take some time to talk about what the option means, some things that you see in an option contract, and where the breakdown is, because I feel like more often than not, this is where book to movie adaptations fail. A project gets optioned and it never makes it into production. There are a lot of things that have to happen here, and oftentimes they don't all happen. So let's talk about that. There are 3 primary parties that may option your book. The first is a studio. A studio could come to you and say, hey, we want to make your book, we're going to option it. Sometimes that's a small production studio, sometimes that's someone like Paramount or Disney or Warner Brothers, and you have this huge studio wanting to option your film. The second party that may option your film, and this seems to be more common, is an independent producer. A producer comes to you, they option your film, and they basically work as your go-between to Hollywood now. They're out looking for directors and actors and financing and distribution and all this stuff that a studio handles right away. This producer is being the go-between. This seems to be the most common type of option, and I will talk in a minute about why I feel like this is the best type of option. The third and least likely party to option your book for film would be a screenwriter. The reason this is less likely is that screenwriters are taking a big risk already when they write on spec, which means they write the screenplay before they see money for it. That's already a big risk for them. So for them to put forward money to pay you for the rights to your book and then go write a screenplay on spec, they're putting a lot of financial burden on themselves. They are taking a huge risk to not only write on spec, but to pay you to be allowed to write on spec. Something that commonly happens is a screenwriter who falls in love with a book will partner with a producer to option the book from the author. That way the producer takes some of that financial burden on them and the screenwriter can write, and together they could go out and try to find financing and studio backing for it. That is more common than a screenwriter themselves optioning the book. But it has happened that a screenwriter loves a book enough that they option the rights to write the screenplay for it, even without backing of a producer or a studio. So why do I feel like the best route for your book to take is to be optioned by an independent producer? I may be a little bit biased because that is how my book has been optioned, but it's more than that. Here's the deal. When a major studio options a book, it's really exciting, but major studios tend to option a ton of properties at one time, because they know that if they pay a small amount for an option, they can hold on to that property for a year or 18 months or 2 years or whatever the option term is and decide whether or not they want to make it. it. So they'll option up a whole bunch of stuff at one time and then take their sweet time deciding which few projects of all those options they actually want to pursue. Whereas a small producer optioning something, they're going to option one or maybe two things at a time, and they really put their all into it. They have their feet on the pavement, they are going and they are taking your book to screenwriters and actors and directors, and they are taking it to studios to find backing and distribution, and they are working super hard on your project because they don't have a ton of projects just sitting on the shelf waiting to see which one might be most profitable in the end. Small producers tend to only put out money to option projects they are extremely passionate about because they don't have the huge working capital of a major studio. Now, there is something to be said for just optioning a book and knowing that it probably won't become a movie, waiting for the option to elapse, and then re-optioning it. And that happens with major studios a lot. I actually know authors who make more money on optioning and re-optioning their books than they make on the books themselves. But if you actually want to see your book on the big screen, I feel like you have a better chance of that happening if you have a smaller, passionate producer who is really working hard to make it happen, rather than a big studio that has a lot of money and buying power, but not the drive to work on your particular project. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the things you'll see in an option contract and some of the things you really want to pay attention to in the event that someone wants to option your book. The first thing, because this is what everyone wants to know, let's talk about money. When your book is optioned, the studio or the producer or the screenwriter or whomever is going to offer you a certain amount to option your book. This does not mean they are buying the rights to your book. They are just paying you an amount of money to promise that for a certain amount of time you will not sell those rights to anyone else. In the option contract, it will be written down how much they will pay you for the rights in the event that they exercise the option and go through with the purchase. And this can look a few different ways. Sometimes it's just a number. If we buy the rights to this book, we will pay you this amount of money. Sometimes it'll look like, hey, we paid you X amount of money for the option. If we exercise it and buy the rights, we will pay you 10 times X or 12 times X or 8 times X or whatever that is to buy the rights to your book. What seems to be the most common is a percentage. And that is not a percentage of what they paid for the option, it is a percentage of the budget. So it'll be written in your contract, in the event that we exercise this and purchase the rights to your book, we will pay you 2.5% of the overall budget, or 5%, or 1%, or whatever you negotiate and work out. Now, when they work in percentages, they typically have what is called a floor and a ceiling. And this is a minimum amount they'll pay and a maximum amount they'll pay. This is a really great thing because if you have a small, quiet film, something that can be shot on a very low budget, which is what I have. Someone Else's Summer, it's a road trip novel. There are no major special effects, no specific locations that'll cost a lot of money. It can be a fairly low budget movie. And so having a floor on that percentage is really important because if your budget is low enough that your 2.5 or 5 or whatever percent ends up being a really low number, you want to make sure you're getting paid for your intellectual property. So they'll put a floor saying no matter what the budget of the movie is, we'll pay you at least this amount of money for the rights. Now on the flip side, they also put a ceiling on that payment, and that is the maximum amount they'll pay. So if you do sci-fi or fantasy and you need huge special effects and epic worlds and all this stuff that is going to start ticking up that budget and making it a really high budget movie, they're saying, hey, you know, we said we'd pay you 3%, but if it goes above this amount, this is the maximum you're making. Because as budgets start to inflate, as often happens in Hollywood, they have to make sure that they are not spending too much of that budget on the rights. In the option contract, you can work in certain clauses like extra credits, meaning if you want executive producer credit in the event that this becomes a movie, that can be written directly into the option contract. And along with that, it can be written how much money comes to you for that credit. There can be consulting fees, different merchandising fees, if merchandising goes with the rights to your book. There are all kinds of money-related things that will work in, and you want that all handled at the option stage. Because if you sign an option, you want it locked in what you will be paid so they don't come around 18 months later and say, okay, we're exercising this option, and then give you way less than you expected or try to cut you out in some way because you don't have it in writing at the time of the option. Make sure that all the financials are in order before you ever sign anything, even if it's just an option, not an actual purchase of rights. The next thing you're going to see in your option is the timeline. People seem to be very misinformed about the timeline in Hollywood, and I think a lot of that is because we see a new superhero movie coming out every 25 seconds, so it seems like things happen really fast. But Hollywood is a really slow place for work. So when you option your book, there will be a time limit on your option. 18 months is a very typical time limit. Sometimes they are 2 years, sometimes they are a year. In very rare cases, people have had 6-month options. That is not typical because there's so much happening behind the scenes that getting it done in 6 months is almost impossible. We're going to work on the assumption of an 18-month option. What this means is from the time you sign that option, your producer or whoever optioned your book has 18 months to exercise the option and buy your rights. But there are always other clauses. A very common clause is the extension clause. And what this means is if at the end of 18 months they still want to work on this and they're not quite there, they have it contractually written in that they can extend for another amount of time. A year extension is very common. So now you're looking at realistically 2.5 years on your option, assuming that they exercise their extension. But on top of that, most options will also have what's called a setup bonus. And what that means is if a major studio does decide they want to get attached to this, they can then exercise the setup bonus, pay you a bigger amount of money, and hold that option for another amount of time. Again, a year is a very common setup bonus. So if you start with an 18-month option, and then they exercise the 1-year extension, and then right at the end of that, a studio says, hey, we're going to do a setup bonus, you got another year there. You are now looking at 3.5 years from the time you sign your option to when things feasibly have to be purchased in order to move before things 100% revert to you. Now, can they revert at the end of the first option? Absolutely. If they don't want to exercise that extension, your option will revert and you can re-option it to whoever you want. At the end of the original option and the extension, if you don't have a setup bonus from a studio, things will revert to you then. There are a lot of variables here, like I said, but realistically on a common option, it can be 3.5 years, sometimes more, before the rights have to be purchased and something in play. There is another clause that if you're in this situation, you really need to pay attention to, and that is the reversion clause. And what that means is after the option, if someone actually purchases the right to your book and they do not move forward with it for a certain amount of time, the rights revert to you and you can try again with someone else. I have known authors who did not have this clause in their option and their rights were purchased and they got paid for them, and then they had to sit and watch as the studio did nothing for a decade because they just didn't care enough. And paying them their amount of money was kind of a drop in the bucket for a huge movie studio. So they went ahead and paid so no one else could make this movie in case they want to someday. Having a reversion clause protects you from that, but there is a catch to it. And that gets more into the money side again. So we're going to jump from time back to money and talk about how option money works. When a book is optioned, they pay a certain amount of money. I am going to use very round, simple numbers for you. Say they pay $1,000 for your option. That is $1,000 against the purchase price, which means if they have it laid out that when they purchase it, they'll give you $100,000. When they exercise that, you actually only get $99,000 because your first $1,000 came as part of the option. Think of it like an advance for your book. It's a similar situation. If you move into the extension period, the money they pay for the extension is not taken against the purchase price. That's just extra money for holding for more time. If you have $1,000 option and $1,000 extension on a $100,000 purchase price, you will still get the full $99,000 at the end because that extra $1,000 extension is just extra money for you. If the setup bonus is exercised, that is taken against the purchase price just like the original option. So if you have a $10,000 setup bonus from a studio, and then you end up selling that $100,000 you sell for, you have to take the original $1,000 option off and the $10,000 setup bonus, and you're now getting $89,000 at the end. Here's where we get to the catch for that reversion clause. The reversion clause kicks into place after the rights have been purchased, so after you've been paid. When you exercise the reversion clause, the rights revert to you with a lien of the original purchase price, which means you don't just get the rights to your book back. You get the rights to your book back provided you give the money back. Considering we're looking at 3, 5, 7 years on this reversion clause, that's a long time to be expected to hold on to that money and give it back, or to be able to pay back in order to get your rights. But the option is there. If a studio has the rights to your book and they're not doing anything, and you have another interested party, or you suddenly fell into a boatload of money and want to become a movie producer yourself, or whatever, the option to buy the rights back is there, provided you have a reversion clause in place and the studio is not actively working on your film. In this contract, you'll also see things like contingent compensation. What that means is the back end money, a percentage of the gross of the movie that you will make. It looks really exciting to be like, wow, I'm gonna make a percentage of the money they make on this movie. But Hollywood accounting is a really tricky kind of math, y'all. And even movies that seem to make a ton of money, when you look at them on paper, don't really make anything. They are very, very good. They have accounting wizards in Hollywood to make sure that this happens. So when you see that percentage, don't get too excited, because the likelihood of the novel writer making a lot of back end is pretty low. But definitely look at it and just know what is in your contract so you are aware in the event that something does come to you. Like I said earlier, the option stage is where I feel most book-to-movie adaptations fail, and there are a lot of reasons for that. We're going to go over what's happening in the background during this 18 months, or 2 years, or 3 years, or 4 years, or however long this option extends for. What is happening and what your producer is trying to do to make your movie happen. The big thing they're doing if you're optioned by a producer and not a studio is they are going to studios and they are trying to find financial backing, distribution, the whole 9 yards. Most working producers don't have the kind of money it takes to make a feature-length film. They are there to put their feet on the pavement, get to work, and pull all the pieces together in order for the movie to be made. The biggest hurdle here is the financing. It takes a lot of money to make even a quiet movie these days. There are a lot of people who need to be involved and who need to be paid, and finding the financing is the biggest hurdle, and it is where so many projects fail. Your producer will also be pitching actors, they will be pitching directors, they will be trying to find whoever they can to attach themselves to the project, because the more talent you have attached to your project, the better that looks for a studio, especially if you can find a big name or an up-and-coming star to attach themselves. Someone that has hype being built around them is a huge thing, and studios are more likely to get financing for projects that have good attachments to them. Another thing that's happening here is your producer is taking your book to screenwriters to find someone to write the screenplay. There's this bizarre chicken and egg thing that happens in Hollywood when a book goes to become a movie. And what that is studios read the book, they look at the book, and they say, this is great, we need to see a screenplay. We can't jump without seeing a screenplay because we don't film books. We film screenplays. We film movies. So you need a screenplay. You go to a screenwriter and they read the book and they say, this is great, I would love to write the screenplay. Where is the money? Because screenwriters don't like to write on spec. It's a huge financial gamble for them. They like to be paid. Everyone likes to be paid. So you have studios who want to see the screenplay and screenwriters who want to see the money, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And hopefully you get to this point where everything clicks into place, things get moving, and you can move on to step number 3, which is pre-production. Pre-production officially begins the moment the option is exercised and the rights to your book are purchased. This is the kind of pre-production we hear about a lot in Hollywood. We are now actively pursuing casting. We're not just talking about actors that attached themselves to the project during the option stage. We are now actively casting all the roles in the movie. We have casting directors auditioning people. We have location scouts and location managers trying to figure out where to film the project. They're looking for things like tax breaks for filming in certain states. They want to make sure that locations will work, that things all fall into place, and there's a lot of behind the scenes things that happen there trying to secure locations to shoot. The screenwriter is actively writing at this point, and then the script will probably be rewritten at least once. It's very common in Hollywood for a script to be written, that screenwriter to be fired, another screenwriter to come in, that screenwriter to be fired, a third screenwriter, or sometimes the first one coming back to fix the things that broke. It is very twisted up in Hollywood, and unless you're Quentin Tarantino, very rarely do you write a script and it becomes a movie without a bunch of steps in between. Another thing that's happening during this pre-production is staffing, non-cast staffing. We are looking for directors and DPs and lighting people and gaffers and grips and craft services people. We need sound specialists, we need assistants, all of the people that work on a movie set, and there are many. They are being hired, figuring out how that works, and making sure that we have the appropriate crew to make this movie. And the biggest thing that's happening in pre-production is the budget. Now, there was a general overall budget when the rights were purchased, and the producer worked out a lot of numbers then. But now that we're in pre-production, they really get into the nitty-gritty of figuring out exactly where the money they have is going and toying around with how they can make it all work. As a certain actor needs a bigger paycheck, where can they take that money from? Or are they finding relatively unknown actors so they could put more money into locations and props or whatever? They really have to work out the nitty-gritty financials at this point. And this is another place where it is very common for a project to stall out and fail. That is very, very common, not just for book to movie adaptations, but for all movies. Assuming your project makes it through this pre-production stage and is officially greenlit, you move into step 4, production. Production is where the bulk of the movie making is happening. We are doing principal photography and reshoots, filming the actual film. Another thing that starts at this point that you as the author can be more involved in is the hype train starts rolling. We start seeing sneak peeks of what's happening on set. The one sheet is revealed, hype is being built, and excitement is being created. So people are super pumped to go watch the movie when it comes out. After they've finished the production stage, your movie moves into step 5, post-production. This is where we're doing things like the editing and sound mastering and all this stuff that has to happen to take that raw footage that we got in production and make it shine and turn it into the beautiful movie that it was meant to be. At this stage, they're really, really ramping up the buzz and the hype, getting active PR and promotion out there. Actors are doing interviews. Sometimes you as the author will be doing interviews, really getting out there and building that excitement for your movie so when it does premiere, it can have a good opening and do what the studio is hoping for, and that is make them money. You want to make a movie, they want to make money. At this point in post-production is also when they'll be submitting to film festivals if they feel your movie is a good fit for those. If your rights were bought not by a major studio, but by a production company, and sometimes when you watch a movie there's like 3 or 4 production cards at the beginning, sometimes multiple small production companies will band together to be able to make one movie. If you do not have major studio backing, your production company will likely enter the film into festivals, because not only does that create buzz and get early reviews and get the hype out there, but a festival is a great place to partner with a studio to get distribution, which is the goal, to get your movie out there in the theaters. Obviously, if you sign with someplace like Netflix or Hulu or whatever, your goal isn't theaters, that's a little different. But there is a lot to be said about festivals when it comes to getting a distribution deal. So that's the basic breakdown of how a book becomes a movie. I hope I was able to shed a little bit of light on what is happening behind the scenes during this process. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask them down below. I am going to answer a couple common questions that I'm sure will be asked, and the answer to all of them is basically the same. But let's start with number 1. Does the author write the screenplay? And the answer to that is almost always no. Novel writing and screenwriting are 2 very different things. When they take a book and want to turn it into a movie, they are going to take it to a screenwriter, someone who knows what they are doing with that format. The author doesn't have say in that. Now, there are exceptions. Sometimes the author has a background in screenwriting, knows the format, knows what they are doing, and in that case, they write the screenplay. Sometimes the author has a big enough platform and following that the producer and the studio feel like it would be beneficial to have their name on the screenplay, and so they write it to do that. And sometimes you end up in that chicken egg scenario I was talking about earlier, and so the author writes the screenplay simply so they will have something in screenplay format to take to the studios to show them. But most often, once the rights are sold, the author steps back and the people who are in the business of making movies, not books, take over and the screenplay is written by them. The other questions all kind of roll together. I get asked a lot, does the author have any say in casting, in the director, in location, in any of this? And the answer, again, more often than not, is no. There are some exceptions. If you are a huge mega bestseller, a big name, they know they'll make oodles of money on your movie, they want to make it super bad, but you do not want to give up creative control and you don't trust giving up creative control, sometimes you will get that creative control in your contract. Stephenie Meyer famously would not sell the rights to The Host for years because she did not trust how it would be made into a movie. So when she finally did sell the rights, she had a lot of input. She was given a lot of power. If you are in that position where you have a mega bestseller on your hands and they are desperate to make it a movie, you have more power and are able to have more say in stuff like this. But for the most part, books and movies are two very different creatures, and once you sell your book for film, someone else is in control of the rest of it. The last question I get asked a lot is, do authors always get to be executive producers? We see this on book to movie adaptations a lot. The author's name pops up in the executive producer credit, and the answer is no, they don't always get that, but it is becoming more common, and that is something that you will want to address at the option stage. You will want that in your contract for the option, so it's not something that you're trying to grab a hold of at the point where the option is exercised and they're buying the rights. Okay, I think I have covered everything. Again, if I was not clear or you have questions, leave them in the comments. I hope you liked this video and that you learned a lot. Give me a big thumbs up if you liked it. Go ahead and click subscribe so you don't miss my future videos. It has been a blast talking to you about books becoming movies. I am Rachel Bateman. I will see you in my next video.